You know that feeling when someone you've just met stands, like, right there, a bit too close,
Oh, yeah. Uncomfortable.
makes your skin crawl almost.
Yeah.
But then think about leaning against a good friend, totally fine, right? Completely easy in their personal space.
Totally different vibe.
It's such a common thing, this sense of, how much space we need. But it turns out it's actually, well, it's surprisingly complex. There's a whole lot going on under the surface. Social cues, feelings, even some biology we don't really think about.
It really is fascinating. What feels totally instinctual, that comfortable distance, is actually built on quite a few different factors working together.
So today on the deep dive, we're going to get into the science behind that invisible bubble around us. We're looking closely at a study by Perry and colleagues from 2015.
A really interesting one.
Yeah, it sheds a lot of light on what controls our personal space, how our empathy fits in, and this pretty surprising role of a hormone called oxytocin.
That's right.
Our aim here is really to give you some of those aha moments. You know, understanding maybe why we react certain ways in social settings, why others do too, but without drowning you in jargon.
And the Perry study's great for that. They set up two really quite clever experiments to explore this.
Okay.
So in the first one, people were basically using a computer simulation. They had these little figures representing a friend, a stranger, an authority figure, even just a rolling ball move towards them.
A ball, okay.
Yeah. And they had to indicate, where they felt comfortable stopping it, their preferred distance.
Right. And the second one,
The second one was more about anticipation. People chose between different virtual room layouts for a hypothetical chat they were going to have. The key thing was how far apart the chairs were.
okay. So different ways of measuring this space preference.
Exactly. Gives a more rounded picture.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. So we're talking interpersonal distance, that space we like between us and others. And like we said, it's not fixed.
Definitely not.
It depends who we're with, right? And I know culture plays a role too.
Absolutely. Edward Hall, way back in the 60s, actually mapped this out. He talked about 4 zones.
Yo.
Intimate distance, for close partners, family. Personal distance for friends, acquaintances. Social distance for more, maybe formal stuff. And then public distance, like giving a speech.
Right. And each zone sort of implies a different kind of interaction.
Exactly. It reflects what we expect and what feels appropriate in that space.
Okay. And then there's oxytocin. We hear about it a lot with bonding, right?
Right.
Parent-child romantic partners.
Often called the love hormone or cuddle chemical.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's maybe not quite that simple.
No, not really.
Yeah.
While it's definitely crucial for those bonding processes and things like childbirth, the idea that Perry and colleagues were testing, the social salience hypothesis.
Social salience, okay.
See, it suggests oxytocin's main job in social stuff might be more about making us pay more attention to social cues. It kind of dials them up.
Yep.
And how we react to those amplified cues then depends on the situation and, importantly, on us, like our own empathy levels. So it's not just oxytocin equals friendly.
Got it. So it boosts the signal, but how we interpret that signal depends. And that brings in empathy, our ability to kind of tune into others' feelings. You mentioned different types.
Yeah, broadly speaking, there's cognitive empathy that's like understanding someone else's perspective, figuring out what they're thinking or feeling.
Okay, the thinking part.
Right. And then there's affective empathy, which is more about actually feeling what they're feeling, or at least resonating with it emotionally.
Feeling with them.
Exactly. And both are really important for reading those social signals, like noticing if someone seems uncomfortable with how close you are, and then maybe adjusting. Someone high in empathy might be much more sensitive to that.
Okay, this is setting the stage nicely. We've got personal space, oxytocin turning up the volume on social cues, and empathy acting as our, social radar.
Right.
So Perry and the team, they were testing this social salience hypothesis, digging into how oxytocin's effect isn't straightforward.
Exactly. They were challenging that simple pro-social label. The hypothesis predicts that by making social cues more salient or noticeable, oxytocin's effect could go either way.
How so?
Well, if you're feeling good, secure, maybe oxytocin makes you feel even more inclined to connect to get closer. But if the situation feels awkward, or maybe even a bit threatening, oxytocin could potentially amplify that negative feeling too.
Okay. So it depends on the context and the person.
Precisely. And their specific prediction was that oxytocin might lead to closer distances for people high in empathy, but maybe greater distances for those lower in empathy.
Right. Okay, let's dive into experiment 1. The comfortable interpersonal distance CID task, the computer animation one. What exactly happened?
Okay, so participants sat at a computer. They saw this animation, basically a stick figure moving towards a central figure representing them. Or sometimes it was that ball rolling towards
The
them.
ball again?
The ball again. And their job was simple. Press a button when the approaching figure or ball reached the distance that felt, just right. Comfortable. Not too close, not too far.
And they did this with different approaching figures.
Yes, a stranger, an authority figure like a boss type of friend, and the ball. And crucially, everyone did this twice. Once after getting oxytocin nasal spray and once after getting a placebo.
Double blind, I assume?
Oh, yes. Neither the participants nor the researchers running the session knew who got what when. Standard procedure.
Good. So you get a baseline, then see what oxytocin does. And you mentioned they measured empathy beforehand.
That's right. They use a standard questionnaire, the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, or IRI. It measures different aspects of empathy, perspective taking, feeling others' emotions.
And based on scores, people were put into high or low empathy groups.
Correct. Now, when they crunched the numbers, the first big thing they saw was what's called a main effect of protagonist.
Okay, main effect of protagonist. Break that down for us.
Sure. It just means that overall, didn't matter if they got oxytocin or placebo, didn't matter about their empathy score. Everyone consistently preferred different distances for the different figures.
And the order was?
Pretty much what you'd expect intuitively. People let the friend get closest, then the ball, interestingly, then the authority figure. And they kept the stranger furthest away.
Makes total sense, like a perceived threat level almost. Friend is safe, stranger, less so.
Yeah.
The ball being second closest is interesting, though.
It is, yeah. We'll come back to that.
Right, but this is where it gets really juicy, right? How did oxytocin change things, and how did empathy play into that?
Right. This is the key interaction, the two-way interaction between oxytocin and empathy. What they found was really neat. Oxytocin didn't affect everyone the same way. For the people who scored high on empathy, the scale cutoff was 40 or more on the IRI. Giving them oxytocin actually made them prefer closer distances overall in the stat.
Wow.
Yeah. But for the participants who scored low in empathy 33 or below on that scale, oxytocin tended to make them prefer slightly more distance. Though, admittedly, that effect for the low empathy group was smaller, less pronounced.
Still, that's fascinating. So the hormone's effect really hinges on your underlying empathic wiring. High empathy, oxytocin means lean in a bit. Low empathy, maybe back off slightly.
Exactly. It really starts to support that social salience idea. Oxytocin is amplifying something, but what it amplifies depends on your baseline social orientation.
But wait, there was even more nuance, wasn't there? Something about how this interacted with the different figures, the friend, stranger, ball.
Yes, that's the three-way interaction. Oxytocin at the type of figure and empathy level. This is where it gets quite specific.
Lay it on us.
So remember how oxytocin made the high empathy folks prefer closer distances overall? Well, that effect was strongest when the ball was the thing rolling towards them.
The ball again, really. Not the friend.
Not the friend specifically. After getting oxytocin, the high empathy group let the ball get significantly closer than they let the stranger or the authority figure approach. Much closer than in the placebo condition.
Huh. Why the ball? Any theories?
Well, the researchers themselves acknowledged it's a bit puzzling. Their thinking was maybe the ball is like a less clearly defined social stimulus. It's not obviously friendly or threatening. It's ambiguous.
Okay.
So perhaps for these high empathy individuals who are already tuned into social cues, oxytocin in this ambiguous situation amplified a feeling of maybe safety or reduced any sense of potential threat, allowing them to be more comfortable with proximity.
Compared to a person where there are more complex social signals to read.
Possibly. It's speculative, but interesting. And importantly, under the placebo condition, you didn't see this special effect for the ball. In the high empathy group, they just showed the expected pattern. Closer to friend, further from stranger authority. It was oxytocin that made the ball situation stand out for them.
That's really subtle. Oxytocin might be influencing how we perceive even things that aren't strictly people but are still moving towards us in a social context.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was experiment 1, immediate reactions to distance. What about experiment 2, the choosing rooms? That feels more like planning or anticipating closeness.
Exactly. It taps into a slightly different aspect, anticipated intimacy or comfort.
Yeah.
So in this one, participants saw pairs of virtual rooms, side by side on the screen. The rooms were identical, except for one key thing: the distance between two chairs placed in the middle. In one room, they might be quite close, in the other, further apart.
And people chose which room they'd prefer.
Yeah, they were told to imagine having a personal conversation with another participant later on, though this chat never actually happened, and choose the room setup they'd feel most comfortable in for that.
Clever. And they had a control condition, too.
They did. To make sure it wasn't just about liking more or less space in general, they also varied the distance between like a table and a plant in the room in some trials. A non-social distance.
Gotcha. And again, oxytocin versus placebo.
Yep, same procedure. Oxytocin or placebo nasal spray beforehand.
So what turned up when people were picking their ideal chat room setup?
Well, interestingly, in this case, just looking at oxytocin alone or empathy alone, neither had a big statistically significant effect on how far apart people wanted the chairs.
Oh, okay. Different from the first experiment, then.
A bit different in terms of those main effects, yes.
Yeah.
But just like in the first experiment, the interaction between oxytocin and empathy did significantly influence the preferred chair distance. Yeah. And critically, this interaction effect only applied to the chair distance, the interpersonal measure. It didn't affect choices based on the table plant distance, the non-social control.
Okay, so again, it confirms the effect is specifically about social space.
Exactly. It's specific to the social context.
And did that same pattern emerge? High empathy folks preferring closer chairs with oxytocin, low empathy, wanting more space.
There was a definite trend that way, yes. It wasn't quite as statistically strong as in the first experiment, but the pattern was there. High empathy participants tended to pick rooms with slightly closer chairs after getting oxytocin.
Do you remember the actual distances?
Yeah, I think for the high empathy group, it was around 78 centimeters with oxytocin versus about 80.5 with placebo. So a couple of centimeters closer.
Okay. Small but there.
Small but there. And for the low empathy group, it trended the other way, slightly further apart with oxytocin, maybe 80 centimeters versus 78 with placebo.
Interesting. And did the angle of the chairs matter? Like facing each other directly versus angled?
They looked at that too. But no, oxytocin didn't seem to affect the preferred angle for either group, just the distance.
And I bet there was a three-way interaction here too.
You bet correctly.
Right.
That significant three-way interaction popped up again. The type of distance, chairs versus table plant, interacting with oxytocin and empathy.
So it really hammers home the point. Oxytocin's effect on our spatial preferences depends on who we are, empathy, and what kind of space we're considering, social versus non-social.
Precisely. It's not acting in isolation. It's this interplay between our own social sensitivity, our empathy, and how oxytocin seems to ramp up the significance of the social cues in the environment.
Okay, so pulling both experiments together, it seems like they really do support this social salience hypothesis pretty strongly.
I think so, yes. The findings, closer distances with oxytocin for high empathy people, especially maybe in less threatening or ambiguous contexts, and that slight tendency for more distance for low empathy people, it all fits the idea that oxytocin makes social information more prominent.
And our reaction depends on our underlying social tendencies. It's not just making everyone want a group hug.
Definitely not. It's making us more attuned, more sensitive to the social world, and then we respond based on our own interpretations and feelings, which are heavily influenced by empathy.
Okay, fascinating stuff in the lab. But what about, the real world? How might this understanding actually be useful beyond just analyzing why someone's a close talker or keeps their distance?
Well, think about healthcare, for instance. Understanding this dynamic that empathy levels can interact with physiology, like hormone levels, to influence comfort with closeness.
Yeah.
That could really inform how doctors, nurses, therapists interact with patients. Being mindful that a patient's comfort with proximity might vary, and it might connect to their underlying empathy. It could help build trust.
So a doctor might, perhaps unconsciously, adjust their distance based on how they read the patient's empathy cues, potentially making the patient feel more comfortable, especially when discussing sensitive things.
Exactly. Or being consciously aware of it. If a patient seems less overtly empathic, maybe giving them a bit more physical space could actually foster a better connection, paradoxically. It's about reading the room, or rather, reading the person in the context.
That makes a lot of sense. Better communication, maybe better outcomes. What about other areas? You mentioned conflict resolution.
Yeah, I think there could be applications there too. In mediation or maybe negotiations. Situations where managing tension and fostering understanding is key.
How so?
Well, just being aware that people with different empathy levels might react differently to the physical setup of the room or how close people are sitting, it could help a facilitator create a more productive environment.
So, thinking carefully about seating arrangements, making sure people don't feel physically crowded or imposed upon, especially if tensions are already high.
Potentially, yes. It's subtle, but these spatial dynamics can influence our feelings and interactions more than we realize. Creating a physically comfortable space might make it easier to navigate the emotional or cognitive distance between parties.
It's amazing how automatic personal space feels, yet how tied it is to these deeper factors. This study also seems to speak to bigger ideas in psychology, right? Like
Mm.
individual differences versus the power of the situation.
Oh, absolutely. It's a beautiful example of an interaction. Behavior, in this case, preferred distance, isn't just about the person's traits, their empathy. And it's not just about the situation, getting oxytocin, who they're interacting with.
It's both working together.
It's the interplay. Oxytocin's effect depends on the person's empathy and the social context. It's a classic person-by-situation interaction.
And it touches on nature-nurture too, doesn't it? You've got biology, the hormone, oxytocin interacting with empathy, which is, well, probably a mix of innate tendencies and learned experiences.
Exactly. It supports that interactionists view our biology and our psychology, shaped by experience, are constantly influencing each other. It's not one or the other.
And even though it focuses on one hormone, it kind of pushes back against being too reductionist, maybe.
I think so. While it isolates oxytocin's role, the conclusion points to a more holistic picture. Social behavior is complex. It involves hormones, yes, but also personality, context, relationships, all interacting.
Okay, wow, we've really unpacked that study. Let's try and summarize the key takeaways. If someone remembers just a couple of things from this deep dive, what should they be?
I'd say the big one is, oxytocin isn't a simple make nice button for social interactions, especially regarding personal space.
Right, not one size fits all.
No, its effect really seems to hinge on your individual level of empathy. If you're high in empathy, oxytocin might nudge you towards feeling comfortable a bit closer, particularly when things feel safe or neutral.
Okay.
But if you're lower in empathy, oxytocin might actually make you want a little more space, though that effect seems maybe a bit weaker.
And this is specifically about social distance, right? Not just space in general.
That's key, yes. The effects were seen for chair distance, not table plant distance. It's about navigating the space between people. So it suggests this really intricate system where our internal wiring, our capacity to tune into others, profoundly shapes how we manage closeness. It might even explain why certain social approaches work better with some people than others.
Really fascinating. So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Thinking about all this, how might those little fluctuations in your own comfort level with personal space, maybe feeling okay being closer to someone one day, needing more room the next, or feeling different with different people, how might those shifts be tiny clues?
News about what?
Clues about maybe your own empathy in that moment, or about the subtle social signals you're actually picking up on without even realizing it. And taking it a step further, how could understanding this whole interplay change how you approach your interactions? Or even how you interpret why other people act the way they do regarding space?
That's a great point to ponder. It invites a bit more self-observation, doesn't it? We'd encourage you to just notice. Notice your own comfort zones with distance in different situations with different people. See if any of what we discussed today resonates with your lived experience.
It's such a fundamental yet often unnoticed part of how we connect or keep our distance from everyone around us.
Absolutely. A subtle dance indeed.